Welcome in, Nick.
Hey, how's it going?
What's that? I see you got a little teal popping up there. You got a little teal shirt. What is that?
Oh, it's an honor.
Oh man, this is like a slow reveal. I like this.
Yeah.
Little higher, little higher. Oh, that's a 5. That's a Nic Batum shirt.
Yeah.
Oh jeez.
Oh.
I hear Claire back there too.
Yep. Hey.
Well, she's not with Nick. There she is. Hey, Claire.
Hey, how are you?
Good. You're not wearing a Nic Batum shirt, are you?
No, just a regular shirt.
All right, get out.
Sorry.
This is gonna be. It's like wearing black right now.
Yeah,
At a funeral.
I don't know. I'm mourning a little bit. I don't really know what's going on. Also, it was clean.
The cat seems to be upset about the Nic Batum situation
Yeah,
as well.
sorry. I've had to put her in the bathroom. She's not too happy about it.
Well,
God.
none of it. I don't think this is. Normally this is Fun Friday, but I'm not even gonna play the full air horn. Today doesn't deserve full air horn.
I know, right?
Daniel says we need Artie on the chat. I love it. He says we need the Fun Friday air horn drops now more than ever. All right, Daniel. I give the people what they want. That's an unnatural air horn. I'll work it in. I'll work it in a natural place. I heard a ding dong. Who just popped in?
Dong.
Oh, he's got video too. Oh, it's about to get rowdy up in here.
Somebody's wilding out.
Why don't you tilt that bad boy up? Let's see that.
Just give us a second.
Let's see that
Just
beautiful
take it
forehead.
easy.
We got 1 minute left in this pre-show. Everyone settle in. We've got a big show. Got Nic Batum talk coming up. We've got Steve Martin, the venerable Steve Martin, elder statesman of the Charlotte Hornets. When I first started watching the Charlotte Hornets, he was the voice. It was him and Jaminski. That was my crew. And yeah. It's fun to have Steve on the show.
Yeah.
And I think he's going to be on more. I don't want to, it's kind of a tease, but I think he's going to be on more.
Sweet.
That'd be awesome.
All right. I think we're ready to start this show. What do you say, kids?
Let's do it.
You are Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
This is Locked On Hornets, your daily podcast on the Charlotte Hornets. We are proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Search your podcast app for Locked On to get podcasts on the NFL, the NBA, and fantasy sports. We are coming to you live from the Gittimer.com studios in beautiful uptown Charlotte, heart of the Queen City, on this Friday. We've got a lot to talk about, a lot to get into. Obviously, the big news of the day is the Nic Batum injury that he suffered in that preseason game against Detroit. We'll have a full update and analysis for you in just a moment. I'm Doug Branson. I'm joined by David Walker on video. I'm sorry, it took my breath away. I had to take a pause there for a second because you're
thank you,
showing
Doug.
your face. Look at this. Look at this guy.
I appreciate that.
And we've also got Claire from Charlotte. What's going on, Claire?
Not much. How are you?
Good. And we have Nick Denning from the capital city, Capital Nick. What's happening, Nick Denning?
Oh, I'm still trying to figure out how long Batum's actually out. It's too much,
I desperately wanted someone to do the LeBron James with the cigarette in his ear meme that said like 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, don't matter. It ain't the full season. Like, where was that? I should have done it. I should have just done it. I was busy yesterday. I'm sorry to everyone out there that I didn't get on that meme. Okay. So let's see. What else do I need to mention? Did I get everybody in here? Yeah, okay. Overcast, download Overcast. Give us a star. If you're on iTunes, give us a 5-star review. It helps us move up the rankings, helps hardcore Hornets fans like yourself find this podcast. And that's it. Oh, listen to Locked On Panthers, too. We got a big game.
Interesting.
Got a big game. Yeah. I don't know how much old Bill Rossetti's going to dive into some of these Cam Newton issues. But give it a listen. Locked On Panthers on the Locked On Podcast Network. Okay, let's begin with some unfortunate injury news for the Charlotte Hornets. Nic Batum out for at least 6 weeks with a torn ligament in his left elbow. He suffered the injury on Wednesday night against the Pistons in the preseason. Less than a minute into the game, got tangled up. His arm got caught between two other players and tore the UCL in his elbow. In baseball, that usually requires Tommy John surgery. According to the team, treatment options are still being evaluated, though, with the two major options appearing to be a combination of rest and rehab or surgery. For Nick's part, he seems to be upbeat on Twitter. He tweeted out, "It's my left arm, guys. Everybody knows I'm not using my left hand." That's what the scouting report says. We have a deep roster. We will be fine. Now, Nic Batum has averaged 15 points, 6.2 rebounds, and 5.8 assists in 34.5 minutes per game over his time with the Charlotte Hornets. Let's start with David. What are the Hornets going to be missing without Nic Batum for whatever length of time he ends up being out?
Well, they'll be missing their starting shooting guard, so they'll likely slide Lamb into that spot. I think Clifford said as much yesterday afternoon. And they'll also be probably missing, which they really can't afford, some more help at backup point guard, because I think Batum was going to slide over there and at least give them some help there, especially with Michael Carter-Williams out and Julian Stone being the only backup point guard really on the roster by definition. So, I mean, I think that's the biggest question. Of course, they're going to lose another creator and another ball handler in the starting unit as well. And the guy that's been there the whole time, Kemba Walker, has kind of made his Kemba Walker jump. So that'll be kind of interesting to see how Kemba starts off the season without his running mate and Nic Batum back there. But like you guys mentioned, at this point, 6 weeks or 8 weeks almost sounds like a gift because of the early reports that we heard that he might be out the whole season. So depth on the wing, I think, will come in to help the team at this point. But certainly they need him in there. As much as fans have gotten frustrated with Nic Batum over the last year and a half or so, he's so important to this team because of what he does, not necessarily in the scoring column, but in other ways. So it's going to be a big loss starting the season.
Nick.
Yeah, I think he's one thing that'll be interesting, at one point that David made about, Kemba Walker and how he will play without him. I mean, I think for the past 2 seasons, we've accepted like, hey, like the two of them make each other better, and Walker's rise has certainly, kind of gone in line with the addition of Batum. But I think at this point, Walker is a better player. I don't think, he doesn't need Nic Batum necessarily anymore. At least I don't think he does. I think if we suggest he does, we're maybe not giving him enough credit. But nonetheless, this is big. I mean, think about MKG 2 seasons ago in preseason. I mean, he's a different player, but the news is just as significant.
Yeah, Nick, you make a great point there. I pulled this stat. When Nic Batum joined the Hornets, he became a primary distributor that freed up Kemba to work off ball, and it sort of helped his initial ascension. In that first year, 15-16, Kemba's effective field goal percentage and true shooting percentage were 52-56 with Batum by his side and 44-51 with Batum off the floor. So that's a pretty significant drop in that first year. But last season, it was pretty much dead even, 53-57 on and off the court. So I think that goes to your point, Nick, that Kemba Walker has seen some growth in his own individual game where maybe he can sustain a little bit, and maybe, if it could further cement his next All-Star candidacy if he's able to maintain his level of production without Nic Batum off the floor. So I guess the question is, Claire, I mean, Nic Batum seems to think the Hornets have enough depth. They're going to be fine in these first few months of the season if that's how many he ends up missing, or if he misses the entire season, that they'll be fine because they have depth. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, sure. I think that, right now,
Sure. Why not?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, why not? Yeah. Who am I to disagree with Nic Batum? But also, I am worried about losing the 3-point shooting and losing the outside advantage that would help out, the inside out game that they currently had going with Dwight Howard. However, first off, if Dwight's going to continue to take it coast to coast, then we might be fine.
There you go.
But also, yeah,
Dwight Howard, primary distributor.
Exactly. But I mean, also, if Malik Monk can step up and kind of take over that role of being the 3-point shooter, then I think that we do have a decently deep roster. But yeah, I mean, this is still a big loss for us too.
Yeah, the guy that will be taking over for him will be Jeremy Lamb, and that's according to Steve Clifford. And of course, Jeremy Lamb took over for Nic Batum when he went out in that game against Detroit and started in place of Nic Batum in 5 games last season. David, how confident are you in Jeremy Lamb being able to at least pick up a little bit of the slack that Nic Batum will leave behind?
Yeah, I think on offense, certainly you feel okay given the way these first 2 preseason games have gone. I mean, some of maybe the best 2 games he's had, like as a pro, they're preseason. We get that. But certainly all the talk in the offseason was of the improvements that Lamb has made. So he's going to get a real chance to show that. And not that this is like his last chance, but look, we've talked about how he's done this about every year he's been in Charlotte. And now he's going to be thrust in the starting lineup. He's having a good preseason so far. So this would appear to be his chance to take the next step forward on that. So on the offense, at least, I think you feel good about it. I think defensive concentration and stuff, which he's been better on again this preseason, is going to be a little different. But we talked about some of the hiccups that even Nic Batum had on defense last year at times. So Clifford's been very complimentary about Lamb being locked in and working hard the whole game. So he's going to have to do that moving forward into the starting lineup. So that's kind of the natural fit. I mean, given that Lamb's played so well in this preseason, that just makes sense. And like you said, Doug, he filled in for him last year.
Yeah, I mean, there are going to be pros and cons. Obviously, the Hornets will be inserting someone in Lamb that is finally fully committed and ready to improve. He's hungry for an opportunity to succeed. He knows the system well. He'll replace what Nic Batum was able to do in terms of dribble handoff situations. He was very effective at the dribble handoff play, which is a huge part of the Charlotte Hornets offense. He was very effective with that last season. And he's very effective in dribble drives and pull-ups as well. The cons, obviously, are he isn't anywhere near the distributor that Nic Batum is. He hasn't shown anything to date to evidence that he'll be able to facilitate consistently for Kemba Walker or Dwight Howard. His three-point shooting fell to new lows last season. If it doesn't rebound, then I'm worried about the floor spacing, guys, because now you're essentially you have 2 3-point shooters in your starting lineup, Kemba Walker, Marvin Williams, and the rest who defenses won't have to worry about from beyond the 3-point line. What does that do to Kemba Walker's ability to penetrate? What does that do to Dwight Howard's post offense? Will teams pack the paint essentially to neutralize what Dwight Howard was able to do in the post last season when he had his one of his most efficient years offensively in his career because of how effective he was in the paint. So, and I'm not talking about post up. I'm not talking about post up offense. I'm talking about his offense when he gets into the post. Dwight Howard, very effective. How will Jeremy Lamb influence that?
Yeah, so, I mean, Jeremy Lamb's going to be taking his spot in the starting lineup, but he's not replacing Nic Batum.
Right.
Nic Batum has a very different game than Jeremy Lamb, and as a result, the Hornets are going to have to change up their offensive schemes, especially in order to suit that. So, I mean, while we're losing 3-point shooting, we're losing some of the spacing, but Jeremy Lamb is, I think, he can create his own shot. He's good with the dribble handoffs, like you were mentioning. But at the same time, how much is the Hornets offense going to eventually have to just rotate around what Jeremy Lamb can do versus what Batum could do?
And I understand the concern from fans because they have watched Jeremy Lamb's progression and they've watched him, get off to great starts and then fade as the season goes. So there's some concern there. But Steve Clifford spoke yesterday at practice and has really been gushing over Jeremy Lamb's offseason, and not just this offseason, but what he sees as sort of Jeremy Lamb executing a long-term plan to become an effective NBA player. Let's take a listen to that.
He's worked so hard, and this isn't like he's done this for 2 months. This has been a steady amount of work since he's gotten here. And the more he's worked, and then I think the more he sees how his hard work was paying dividends. This summer he notched it up even more. And he has a confidence level. That's what happens, right? You do something over and over, and you work at a good pace, and now it's all paying off for him.
All right, Steve Clifford there at practice yesterday. And, of course, just to reset here, Nic Batum out for at least 6 weeks, and the team is still evaluating options for this torn UCL in his left elbow that he suffered in a preseason game on Wednesday night. And so whatever happens, it looks like Nic Batum could be out for a significant amount of time. And now we're talking about basically who should replace him. Lamb, I know a lot of folks are out there talking about maybe starting Malik Monk, or that's their desire. What do you say to that, Claire? You're shaking your head right now. Why are you shaking your head towards the prospect of starting Monk at some point? Because we know it's going to be Lamb at least initially, but why not Monk at some point?
Well, I was kind of shaking my head because there's no way that Steve Clifford would have done that right now, at least. Because Steve Clifford is not too high on starting rookies. So I think that in right now, Malik Monk has been playing very well. And he's been playing very well against the other team's second units. And if that's what helps balance out this team a little bit more, then that's fine. I think that right now Steve Clifford is looking for a rotational advantage versus hey, let's start all of our best guys and throw Malik Monk to the wolves, basically. I really don't see Steve Clifford starting Malik Monk just yet because, again, it takes away that rotational advantage.
I want to go out to the chat right now. We've got a few live chatters. Thanks to everyone. Daniel, David, who else we got here? Two Davids. Yeah, nice. So David saying, I can't feel good about 6 to 8 weeks when there's still the possibility for surgery. I hope Rich Cho is planning for that possibility.
Cho knows.
Well, we'll see. And that's, the Hornets have a history of experiencing a long-term injury to a core piece and making a move, but it usually doesn't happen right away, and I wouldn't expect it in this case to happen right away. I think if there's one place they're comfortable with in terms of their depth, I think it's at the wing position. If this had happened at the point guard position, well, that's another story entirely. But at the wing position, they've got players in Jeremy Lamb who they're comfortable with seeing step up and played in or started in 5 games last season. So I wouldn't expect that to happen initially.
Yeah.
I want to go to the other members of the panel here on the Monk situation, because I know there are a lot of fans curious as to why you would go with Jeremy Lamb and not the 11th pick in the draft, Malik Monk, mainly because of Monk's ability to score the basketball, to space the floor, something that we talked about Jeremy Lamb may struggle with this season. Nick, what do you see as the issues with starting Malik Monk at the 2 spot?
Well, like Claire alluded, there's 2 things that Clifford typically doesn't do. It's rookie. He doesn't usually start rookies, but he also always goes with a more defensive-minded starting 5. Obviously, Lamb's not known for his defense, but definitely more so than Monk at this point. I think, especially in the first game, Monk looked a little exposed on the defensive end. Size also is a big issue here. We've been talking about comparing Kemba and Monk together. We recognize it's an issue. If you go ahead and do it from game 1, you're causing problems for yourself. I said this before, and I don't think the situation has changed. Give Monk ways to succeed. And I think the best way to do that right now is to keep him on the bench as he proves himself there. Maybe depending on how things are going elsewhere, maybe start slipping him in, with the starting unit a little bit more, but don't just throw, as Claire said, don't just throw him out to the wolves just because we've lost Batum. You can't change everything at this point, especially with someone like him.
Yeah, and there's also this issue that the Hornets don't have a lot of financial flexibility, so a free agent signing would have to be the vet minimum at this point, and even vet minimums could, if you're talking about a guy who's has a lot of years of service, could threaten to take them into luxury tax territory. So it's a tough financial situation. And then also, in terms of trading, we talked about this in the offseason a lot, and this situation really hasn't changed all that much, which is the Hornets don't have a ton of great trade pieces. I mean, guys, they're depending on players this season to step up and become trade pieces. So, that's the situation that they find themselves in now. So I think they really do have to roll with a lot of their depth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that right now, like I said, I mentioned that rotational advantage, and I mentioned the ability to take Malik Monk off the bench and use him against the other team's basically second unit. But I mean, Nick was absolutely right in saying that, we don't want to screw up his progress either. I mean, right now, like that's also, I think, in the forefront of Steve Clifford's mind is, how best to help out Monk transition to the NBA versus, like I said, just kind of throwing him out there as well, especially on the defensive end.
Absolutely. All right. So, I did see Steve Clifford at practice yesterday talking to both Kemba Walker and Dwight Howard for a very long time before he came over and spoke to the media. So, I think as much as we want to talk about, Jeremy Lamb, Malik Monk, who's going to step in for Nic Batum, what can they replace, what can't they replace, I think really what this says is more than ever, this team's success is going to hinge on Kemba Walker and Dwight Howard, and especially Dwight, because Kemba's shown what he can do. It's Dwight Howard. Can he gel? Can he be effective in the post? Can he continue to show what he's already shown, which is that he can be a defensive presence inside that changes possessions. That's what we talk about offense all day long, but what I've really loved seeing from Dwight Howard at this point in the preseason, it's very early, I understand that, but I really love seeing him turn possessions completely around with his post defense. Basically change not only in block shots, which he's done a lot of, not only in steals, which he's done a couple of as well, not only in running full court and dunking on Boban Marjanovic, but I've seen point guard, and this is what Steve Clifford talked about, and it's been confirmed already in these first two preseason games. You've seen guards penetrate against this Hornets defense and pull up and check up because they don't go all the way to the rim because they don't want to run into Dwight Howard. There's a fear factor there. And Dwight Howard says he wants to be on all defense, and he looks like he's trying to do that. So I think those are going to be two big pieces that, can the Hornets sustain a 6 to 8 week to 12 week absence and still make the playoffs? I want to end on this question. And we'll talk more about this next week for sure as this situation develops. But I want to end on this. If Nic Batum elects to have surgery and does indeed miss the entire season because of that surgery, can the Hornets still make the Eastern Conference playoffs? We'll start with Nick.
Yeah, but I think we're probably in a situation like last year where it's, we're not comfortably, in the playoffs. We're probably looking out at times. But I mean, I say this with a bit of confidence, and this is just based on what we've heard about Lamb and the fact that we have a little bit more depth. But, this really could go a number of ways. And I do think there's enough talent for them to make the playoffs without him, but it's not good.
Claire.
Yeah, I mean, we're still in the Eastern Conference. I mean, the Eastern Conference is not, the Western Conference.
Well, it's certainly not as strong as it's certainly not as strong as it's been in previous years.
Yeah, that's the smartest thing I've ever said. But I mean, yeah, we're still in the Eastern Conference, and I agree with Nick. It might be a bit of a struggle. It might be a bit of we've got 5 games left. We got to win 3 of them, kind of thing. But at the same time, if Lamb can continue to play the way he's played, and if Malik Monk can develop into a good shooting guard and he can continue to develop his defensive skills, then you know what? Like, I don't really see why not. Yeah, I mean, this injury hurts. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, we're not completely out of it either.
David.
Yeah, they can't afford for much else to go wrong, and they really need to shore up the backup point guard too. I come back to that because right now it's such a toss-up, and he was going to play some minutes back there, and so it just falls more on Kemba. So it's going to be obviously a lot was going to be up for Kemba anyway. But like Nick said, it'll be a lot like last year. They really couldn't afford to lose a whole lot of people for any more time. But being in the East certainly helps. So they'd probably be in the mix still. It's just not going to be as much of a given, I'll say. So it'd be tough. This is a tough way to start the season, losing one of your leaders.
And we have a lot of Davids here, so on the chat and right in front of me. So I'll say David M. saying on the chat, we just all know the plan is to win now. If Batum does indeed need surgery, I don't see them doing nothing. And I think that's a great point. I think they, regardless of how this Nic Batum injury shakes out, I think the plan is still to get to the playoffs and try to be competitive enough to win that first round playoff series. And so, yeah, I think that's a great point to look at in the future. Time now for a few Buzzamaniacs shout-outs. Omar, Adam, Ethan, and David all decided to join the Nest and support the show with a financial contribution. Every dollar that you contribute through Patreon goes to making this show better with equipment and services that we'll use to bring you live post-game shows and exclusive Buzzamaniac-only interviews throughout the season. If you're listening and haven't joined the Nest yet, what are you waiting on? Visit patreon.com/LOH and find out all of the benefits of supporting this show, and you can join cool people like Omar, Adam, Ethan, and David. Thanks again, and go Hornets. I had a chance to chat with one of my favorite Hive minds, Steve Martin, radio play-by-play announcer for the Charlotte Hornets on 102.5 WFNZ. Now, we talked before the Batum news, but a lot of what we discussed was very interesting in light of that news, and this is a portion of the interview. If you want to hear the whole thing, I posted it on our Patreon. So take a listen to Steve Martin. Great insight here from a Hornets legend. So, Steve, it's early in the preseason. I know it's difficult to kind of glean much right now, but after watching the team play 2 preseason games, what do you think you might know about this team at this point?
Well, I might know, and I probably do know, that it's deeper than we've seen here in recent years. The talent goes 10 deep. The second unit looks to be a lot better than we've had in the past couple of years. So I think that speaks well, because when statistically, the first unit of this team last year was very good. When they left the game, and especially when they, meaning Kemba Walker, left the game and we needed a backup point guard, we were terribly outmanned by our opponents on just about every occasion. And that's not so much the case from what we've seen in the first 2 preseason games. And especially last night in Detroit, second unit was outstanding even after. And you have to take into consideration what Detroit's aims were. They were opening a new building for the first time in downtown Detroit, and Stan Van Gundy made a point of saying, "Hey, we're not going to play any more than 10 players, and they're going to be our base 10." It was an untypical preseason game, because when it got close and the Hornets erased a 20-point deficit and then took the lead, you saw some desire in both teams' eyes. So I was impressed by what I saw of the Hornets last night, especially of their reserve troops. They did a great job.
Absolutely, Steve. A lot of young players out there fighting really hard for that very close victory by the Hornets. You've been doing this for a long time. You've been through many of these preseason periods before and talked to a lot of coaches. What are some types of things that you can derive from preseason, and what kinds of things should you maybe be a little careful about overanalyzing?
Well, I think you overanalyze. I think the things you tend to overanalyze are maybe shortcomings of your regular starters, because I know to a man, and Kemba Walker tells you unabashedly, "Hey, this is preseason. It's not the real thing." And sometimes I think the players kind of subconsciously, that kind of gets into their subconscious, and they're more worried about not getting hurt. And I see that, and I think that's a great way to approach preseason. There are no awards for going unbeaten in preseason.
Well, let's talk about that depth situation, because as you mentioned, several reserves for the Hornets playing very well last night in Detroit, one of them being Jeremy Lamb, who had to step into a starter-type role when Nic Batum went down very early in the game. He's now gone 2 straight games with 17-plus points. Is he a guy on your radar as one of these players that by the end of the season has completely rewritten his whole narrative?
Well, the thing about Jeremy is that there's always a lot of hope in the early part of the season.
Mm-hmm.
And durability has been a problem with him, not only in his 2 years previous with the Hornets, but when he was at Oklahoma City as well. And they sent him down to the G League for about 47 games and just didn't really have a spot for him. And I think he's learned from all of that. This year he comes in, it's a different body type for Jeremy Lamb. He looks, he kind of looks like a defensive back in football. He's got he's really kept himself in great shape. I don't think there's anybody that really works harder than Jeremy Lamb. He is a self-described basketball junkie. It seems to be the only place that he feels totally comfortable, even if he's totally by himself. He can be sitting there just bouncing the ball between his legs, sitting on a chair, and that's fine with him. And that could occupy 15 minutes of his time. So the gym is his friend, and he stays there, spends a lot of time. What we've yet to see that I think we're going to see this year is that time is going to start paying off, and I think he's going to take better care of his body. I'd be surprised if Jeremy, unless he's had some toe and ankle injuries through the last couple of years that have plagued him. If he gets beyond that and plays himself a full season with his current attitude and the way that he's keeping good care of himself, I think we'll get a lot out of Jeremy Lamb this year, and it will be really, Doug, a total surprise.
Well, and hopefully the same can be said about Malik Monk, who also had a fantastic evening against Detroit, 19 points, and played really well in those crunch time minutes. Great experience for the young rookie. Do you think he's getting more comfortable out there? He didn't have summer league, obviously. Is he looking more comfortable than he was maybe in that first game against Boston?
Yeah, he talked to him in the locker room after the game last night, and he said each game is an experience, and he's gaining something. And last night's game was interesting for him because he came in the second quarter, and even though the second quarter was a bad stretch for the Hornets as a team, it's when the Detroit lead grew to 20. He in particular played. He was the only guy on the Hornets side that played very well, and he had 9 points by halftime. And then he came in again late in the third and through the fourth and played extremely well and wound up with 19. And in fact, if you take a look at it, the last 7 points of the game, 6 of the last 7 points of the game were scored either by Malik Monk or Dwayne Bacon. And Cody Zeller threw in one foul shot at the end, and that was it. So I thought it was unique that those two rookies came in and really acted like adults in a situation where they were going up against experienced players at the end of the game, and they did the right things to win both offensively and defensively.
Now, this is a special year for you, Steve. This is year 30 covering the NBA. What have been some of your favorite moments throughout your long tenure?
Well, I think probably the most favorite moment was, a lot of people make a big thing about our 1993 playoff win against Boston. But I think probably the thing that was the most fun game I've ever done was a regular season game. I think it was in 1995. It was late in January, and we had Alonzo Mourning, but he was hurt. We had Larry Johnson, and he did a certain amount of things. But then in the fourth quarter, we're playing Orlando, and of course they got Shaquille O'Neal and they got Penny Hardaway and all these other guys, and a nice young lineup. And they were an up-and-coming team, and they would find themselves in the NBA Finals. But the Hornets that night, on the strength of Hersey Hawkins and Del Curry, held them off and won in the last 2 minutes of the game. The crowd at the old Charlotte Coliseum, it was sold out because that was a star power night. You had Shaquille O'Neal, might have had Alonzo Mourning, but you definitely had Larry Johnson and Muggsy Bogues and all that. It was a packed house, and I've never heard a crowd so loud in my life as the Hornets were dropping threes. Hawkins and Curry were outstanding, and they carried it at the finish. And and the Hornets beat the Magic that particular night in Shaquille O'Neal. So that was probably the most memorable night that I had. I nearly lost my voice when I was calling on one of Hersey Hawkins' three, and it was like I fell off a cliff, and then the fans just kind of swallowed it up, and so it was a fun call.
Big thanks to Steve Martin there, radio play-by-play announcer for the Charlotte Hornets, and you can listen to him on WFNZ 102.5, calling every Hornets game. And fun to hear his favorite memory was a regular season game, but it was a great call, and he remembers the crowd. I think that was probably what made it special because those old Charlotte Coliseum days were quite fun to be around. Wanted to basically piggyback on one thing that he said about Malik Monk's crunch time minutes that he got in Detroit and how well he stepped up. I asked Malik Monk at practice yesterday about that moment and if he felt more comfortable in those type of situations, and here's what he had to say about that.
That's the time to step up. I mean, basketball players want to be in that situation, hit buzzer beaters and stuff like that. You always dream about that, but that's when I step up the most.
I think Malik Monk is definitely dreaming about hitting some buzzer beaters for the Charlotte Hornets. And again, he looked more comfortable. He looked more aggressive in that moment. And we didn't talk about, Jeremy Lamb will get the start initially, but who will close? I think that's a big question, and we're going to have to pay attention to these preseason games to kind of try to get some clues about that. But Malik Monk in that game against Detroit certainly made his case that he's a closer, that he's a guy you can count on as the clock is winding down, and that would be exciting to see paired along Kemba Walker. All right, some final thoughts on the Nic Batum injury and anything else you guys are thinking about right now. We'll start with Nick.
One guy I'd actually like to see how he does, given that he'll probably have an opportunity now, is Bacon. I wrote about how we may not see much of him unless there are injuries, and now with Batum, that kind of slides him probably into the rotation a little bit. He obviously ended the game against Detroit, so interested to see how he steps up.
David.
Yeah, I just think it's another adjustment for this team to make and not a lot of time to get ready for this season when they're already having to adjust with a new big presence in Dwight Howard being there in the starting lineup and Cody Zeller shifting to the second. The good thing is it's pretty much a veteran group. They've been here for a while, and except for the rookies, they kind of know what to expect. So they'll have to help those young guys along because, as Nick mentioned, I think Bacon and certainly Monk are going to get pushed up in the lineup a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see how they react.
Claire. Oh, we may have lost Claire. She's got to get out of here, man. She's got things to do, and that's good. We got things to do too. We got. Oh no, Claire. Okay, Claire. Final thoughts.
Sorry, yeah, I put myself on mute because the cat was acting up. No, but I'm really interested to see how Dwight Howard's going to come out of this and how his play is going to change. Right now, I mean, there's one thing I can't really put a whole lot of stock into, and it's wins and losses in preseason.
Sure.
And right now, like I don't really care if we win or we lose. I just want to be able to work out like whatever offensive scheme the Hornets want to be able to work out with Nic Batum's absence.
Absolutely, and we'll get another chance to see the Hornets in preseason on Monday night against the Miami Heat in Miami, and then, of course, on Wednesday, they return back to Charlotte to play the Boston Celtics, and that game will be televised on ESPN, and you'll have a chance to get to Spectrum Center if you're in and around the Charlotte area, and we hope you do. And we thank you for listening to Locked On Hornets. Subscribe to us if you haven't already, and tell a friend. Get some people involved in this because, we want as many listeners as possible as we head into this regular season. We're going to be covering the team like never before. So thanks so much for listening and supporting us by listening or on Patreon. We really appreciate it. Shoot us your Hornets questions and thoughts to buzzbuzz@lockedonhornets.com. We're back again on Monday with a preview of that preseason game and much more discussion about this Nic Batum injury. For David and Claire and Nick and the entire crew here at Locked On Hornets, I'm Doug saying go Hornets, go America. Let's swarm Charlotte.